All right. Welcome back, everyone. AS 221, AS 252 instrument pilot operations. We are in Unit 6. Today we're going to be talking about attitude instrument flying. Lesson 1, we have spent a lot of time reviewing some pretty similar or things that we've discussed in previous courses, such as private pilot ground school. So hopefully, up till now, a lot of what we have done has been review for you. But now moving forward, we're going to start getting into some new information. We're going to start diving into the bread and butter of instrument flying, starting with attitude instrument flying. So this is a really important lesson. Our unit objective, the student will understand the fundamental skills of basic attitude instrument flying, or what we commonly refer to as BAI. Explain the control performance method of BAI. Understand the difference between control and performance instruments. Explain the primary supporting method of BAI. Understand the difference between primary and supporting instruments during various flight maneuvers. Recognize common BAI errors and understand how to avoid or mitigate BAI errors. Here are the Airman Certification Standards. So again, this is what guides us in our class. These are the things that you are responsible for, essentially when you take your check ride and when you take your knowledge exam. So in task 4A, flight by reference to instruments, the applicant demonstrates an understanding of elements related to attitude instrument flying during straight and level flight, climbs, turns, and descents, while conducting various instrument flight procedures. Interpretation, operation, and limitations of pitch, bank, and power instruments. And then in task 7D, approach with loss of primary flight instrument indicators. The applicant demonstrates understanding of recognizing if primary flight instruments are inaccurate or inoperative and advising ATC or the evaluator. Common failure modes of vacuum and electrical attitude instruments and how to correct or minimize the effect of their loss. So those are the things we are responsible to. For this unit, what are we on, 6? Is this 5 or 6? Unit 6. For our references, we're out of the ASA. If you have that book, The Pilot's Manual Instrument Flying, Chapter 1, Introduction to Instrument Flight. And then Instrument Flying Handbook. Again, this is our primary source for this class. We're in Chapter 6, Sections 1 and 2, the airplane attitude instrument flying using analog instrumentation and electronic flight display, as well as Chapter 7, Sections 1 and 2, airplane basic flight maneuvers using analog instrumentation and electronic flight display. There's also some information out of the G1000 Pilot's Guide as well as the Cockpit Reference Guide. So, once again, we are flying by our instruments, and our G1000 is what provides our instrumentation for us. So those are extremely helpful guides. Hold on while I plug in my computer real fast. Okay. Attitude instrument flying. Some would argue that this is the most important lesson in your instrument training. Everything we do, your success as an instrument-rated pilot will always come back to BAI, or the basics of attitude, your instrument rating, BAI. Okay, it's always going to come back to this. A lot of what we will learn after this is really, I would say, like knowledge-based. And your ability to, say, fly an instrument procedure or fly along a Victor airway or track and intercept a radial off of VOR, a lot of that starts with a knowledge of how they work and a knowledge of the procedures and how to do it. But your ability to perform that will always come back to BAI. So that's why this is sometimes considered the most important lesson in your instrument training. This is the foundation of your instrument training. So So with that in mind, take good notes, pay attention, and please feel free if there's at any point you're watching this video and you're confused, feel free to reach out to me and to ask any questions, or we can do a Zoom call or Skype call, whatever needed, to go over anything you might have questions on. Because again, this is really important information. All right, fundamental skills. So remember before, you have always flown by reference to the outside. So you are a visually rated pilot for VFR, Visual Flight Rule. So everything you did was always based on what you could see outside. And then you would reference your flight instruments as they were always secondary to looking outside. But now that we're becoming instrument pilots, these things are primary. So your flight instruments are primary. So to start us off, some fundamental skills are always going to be based on how well you can observe and interpret and react to what your instruments are telling you. And with that being said, you need to have what we call a good scan. We want to have a good scan, or an instrument cross check. And as we'll learn, all of our instruments are telling us a story. They're telling us a story about what our aircraft is doing. And hopefully, ideally, they're all telling us the same story from a different point of view. Because we know, if you're flying along and you pitch up, I should see that on my attitude indicator. I should see a pitch up. If I do that and I'm at the proper power setting, I should start to climb. So I should see my altimeter start to rise. I should see my VSI start to rise. I should see a drop in airspeed. If I'm in a turn, I should see a bank in my attitude indicator. I should see my heading indicator start to change. I should see my turn coordinator showing a turn. So you can quickly see how every instrument should be telling the story of what your aircraft is doing. They're all just telling the same story from a different point of view. In some ways, your airspeed indicator and your altimeter are telling the same story. If I'm in a climb, my airspeed should be dropping, at least for a few moments. Or if I'm starting a climb, it should drop initially, and I should see my altimeter start to rise. They're telling the same story, but again, through different points of view. So with that in mind, a good fundamental skill that we have to have developed as instrument pilots is the ability to scan. So again, we are going to learn how to scan our instruments, or cross-check. I want to make sure that all of my instruments are telling the same story. So there's three methods here that we use to scan our instruments. The first of which is what we call the selected radial. This is what a lot of people consider to be the preferred method of instrument scan. It starts with your attitude indicator. So we would, in this scan, you would primarily be looking at your attitude indicator, because it's one of the best indicators of what our aircraft is doing. We really like our attitude indicator. So the radial method of scanning means that you always start with your attitude indicator. Then you would go to your eyes, right? Again, we're not looking outside. There's clouds. So imagine you can't see outside. So this is what you're looking at. You're looking at only your instruments. So you would start with your attitude indicator. Then your eye would bounce over to your airspeed indicator. And once you've checked your airspeed, let's say we're flying straight and level, your airspeed shouldn't be changing and should be whatever you set it at. Then our eyes go back to our attitude indicator. Is my attitude indicator where I left it? If it is, if everything looks great, then I go down to my turn coordinator. Okay, if I'm flying straight and level, I should be coordinated. My wing should be level. If that's good, then I go back to my attitude indicator. My attitude indicator is still good, so then I go down and look at my HSI. My HSI is good, so I go then back up to my attitude. And then I go down and look at my vertical speed indicator. Again, if I'm not in a climb, if I'm flying straight level, should read 0. And if it is, then I go back to my attitude indicator. And as you can see, this is why we call it the radial, because we are radiating from the attitude indicator towards each individual instrument and then back to the attitude indicator. That's why they put it in the center there. This design, the way things are laid out, is very important. Then we have the inverted V method. Let's see if I can erase this stuff real fast. So now I have the inverted V method. Again, starting with your attitude indicator. The inverted V method, you're primarily looking at your turn coordinator and your vertical speed indicator. So you're looking at your attitude indicator, then you're looking at your turn coordinator, then you're looking at your vertical speed indicator. This is what we'll call the inverted V. Because again, these three give you a lot of information. And then you would simply be referencing the other three. So this could be another method of a cross-check or a scan. You're going in between attitude, turn coordinator, and vertical speed while referencing the other three. So that is why you can see it kind of makes an upside down V if you look at it that way. So that is the inverted V method. Let's erase all this again. And then the last, the most basic, the simplest, is the rectangle method. Change to black. The rectangle method is really simple. You just pick one, you start at it. So let's say we start at the airspeed indicator. Then we just go down to the turn coordinator. Then we go over to the HSI, and then we go over to the vertical speed, then we go up to the altimeter, and then we go over to the attitude indicator. You can see as you follow this along, you're just making a rectangle. So you're just scanning each one, making sure it's telling you what you want to be seen, what you expect to be seen, and then you move on to the next one. So with this, you're just constantly scanning, make sure everything is telling you what you expect to see. So those are the different types of scans you can use. Again, the selected radial, this first one we looked at, is your preferred. It's kind of the best, I think. Always going back to your attitude indicator and then going in between each instrument, always going back to your attitude indicator. You can see it's basically the rectangle method. But you're just always, your eyes are always going back to that attitude indicator. So that is the preferred method. And then another fundamental skill is instrument interpretation. Instrument interpretation. What does your instrument tell you? What information is it displaying? What kind of data does it tell us? Instrument interpretation is really, it's really important. Knowing exactly how that instrument works, the information it's giving us, is going to help us quickly analyze what is our aircraft doing and what do I need to do to either fix it, correct it, or make it do what I want it to do. So really understanding the limitations, what that instrument is giving us is really important. And when it comes to aircraft control, there are three fundamental skills that we use to control our aircraft. That is pitch, and bank should be on here as well. I don't know why bank's not added. So we should have pitch and bank, power, and trim. Hopefully, as you progress through your private pilot training, you used trim a lot. However often you use trim in your VFR course, you should now be using it 10 times as much in the instrument course. Everything we do, you should always be trimming, because we have a lot more tasks that we have to take care of in the aircraft. And to do that, we want the aircraft essentially to fly itself. So every time we fly, every time we do a maneuver, a turn, once we're established in that turn, all of our instruments are telling us what we want to see, then we should trim our aircraft so that it can keep staying in that configuration without us having to guide it along. So you should always, always, always be trimming. Okay, so those are the fundamental skills. All right, now let's talk about the control and performance method. We have a saying in the instrument course: pitch plus power gives us performance. Your pitch and your power give us performance. So this is a really important piece to understand, that as for anything you want to do, if you want to make a turn, if you want to climb, if you want to descend, we have to set a pitch attitude, we have to set a power setting, and that is going to give us our performance. Okay, so pitch plus power gives us performance. So anytime you do a maneuver, there are kind of 4 steps. The first of which is establish. So you will establish the pitch or bank. We kind of throw bank in there as well. We establish our pitch, bank, and power setting. Once we've done that, and we have the performance we want, we're getting the airspeed, the climb performance. We see that all of our instruments are telling us what we want to see. Then we set our trim. So you take that trim wheel and you spin to take all pressure off the controls. That allows you to be freed up to now do other tasks. Okay, because with instrument, remember, there's always some kind of task you need to be accomplishing. If you're doing an approach, you probably have an approach plate. You're probably looking at different altitudes and waypoints and VORs you're trying to intercept. So you have a heavy task load. And when you trim, when you establish your pitch and power, and then you trim, ideally the aircraft should be taking care of itself at that point. Then once we trim, again, we are cross-checking. So this is where that scan comes in. We're looking at our instruments, we're cross-checking. We're making sure the instruments are telling us what we want to see. We're getting the performance we want. And then also that all of the, again, our instruments are telling us a story about what our airplane is doing, what the aircraft is doing. They're all telling the same story, but again, from different points of view. So we want to make sure that their stories line up, that none of them are in disagreement. And then after that cross-check, we then adjust. If we need to adjust it all, we make those minor adjustments. All right, so that is the control performance method. Pitch plus power equals performance. And then we establish ourselves either in that straight and level, that climb, that descent, that turn, climbing turn, descending turn. Once we're established, we trim. We then cross-check all of our instruments, and then we make any minor adjustments as necessary. This is a lot of this is laid out in the ERAU standardization manual. The ERAU standardization manual. There is a section in there for what we call rules of thumb. So that's something that's going to be very helpful in your flight training. The rules of thumb. There's just some quick memory aids to help you when it comes to the control performance method, getting the performance you want. So I highly recommend taking some time and reading through the rules of thumb in the standardization manual, as well as the maneuver descriptions. So anytime you're learning a new maneuver, go read those descriptions. Because for instrument, there are a lot of, they're not complicated, these aren't like the maneuvers you were doing in your private pilot training. But they're maneuvers that we have to learn so that we can be proficient instrument pilots. So I'd highly recommend go take some time and read through the ERAU standardization manual, especially the rules of thumb. So continuing the control performance method. Um, you always want to start, again, setting your pitch. So you set your pitch, you set your power, you set your bank if you're in a turn, and then you trim for hands-off control. You cross-check your instruments, make sure they are all in agreement, and then adjust pitch and power as necessary. And what's really nice is our G1000 makes that a lot easier. You can see here we are looking at the airspeed indicator, the airspeed tape in the G1000. It gives us this little pink line. This pink line is trend information. So you're actually able to see how your aircraft is trending. So ideally, once we have set our pitch, our power, our bank, and we have trimmed, we should not see any trends. Unless, once we're established, we should not see any trends. We want to make sure that the aircraft is doing what we want it to do. So if I'm flying straight and level and my airspeed is trending up, I've done something wrong or something is not set properly, because we don't want trends once we are established. All right, so let's talk about what are the control instruments. What are my control instrumentations? Remember, we have control plus pitch plus power equals performance. So this is our control performance method. I was a little tongue-tied there for a second. So what are the control instruments? What are the instruments that we are using to control the aircraft? Think of these as like direct results. So for example, your attitude indicator tells us pitch and bank. This is helping us immediately control the aircraft, because my attitude indicator directly shows me what my aircraft is doing. This is control because it's showing us, right? I want to set a pitch attitude. I want to set a power setting. So that's why we have our attitude indicator. That's why we have our tachometer, which tells us our RPM, and our manifold pressure gauge. Because remember, pitch plus power equals performance. So these essentially three things represent that pitch plus that power. And now there's three of them because it just depends on what kind of propeller you have. If you remember, if you have a fixed pitch propeller, you only have RPM. So fixed pitch, FP, propeller, you only have RPM. If you have a constant speed propeller, so remember, a constant speed propeller allows you to change the pitch of that blade, you will have RPM plus a manifold pressure gauge. So these two things represent your power. Okay. So that's why these are our control instruments. This is how we control the aircraft. So you can see why the attitude indicator is pretty important of the instruments in our 6-pack. So you can see our 6-pack here. I know it looks like an 8-pack, but we don't consider engine instruments in the 8-pack. The 6-pack. So in the 6-pack, our attitude indicator is our control instrument. And then we use our tachometer, our RPM, and our manifold pressure gauge to set our power. So if these are our control instruments, then these are the performance instruments. So then these instruments are telling us how is the aircraft performing. Based on what I used for my control, now that I've inputted my pitch and my power, or my pitch, bank, and power, how is my aircraft performing? So the first of which is our airspeed, right? If I add full power and I pitch up, what should my airspeed indicator do? It should probably drop a little bit. So I should see a drop in airspeed. So it's showing me the performance of my aircraft in terms of speed. My altimeter is showing the performance of my aircraft in terms of altitude. Oops. So again, we have speed, altitude. And then our turn coordinator, again, is showing the performance of our aircraft in terms of bank. So it's bank information, as well as standard rate turn. So I'm just going to write SR for standard rate turn. Are we accomplishing a standard rate turn? Is that the performance we're getting? And then also it has that inclinometer. So it tells us, are we coordinated? Are we coordinated? So the turn coordinator is giving us that 3 bits of information for performance. And then we have our heading indicator. Again, that's telling us what is how is the control inputs we've put in changing our direction. So it's giving us that piece of performance, and then our vertical speed indicator. So these are the performance instruments. It tells us how our aircraft is performing. Control instruments are telling us, or we're using them as control inputs, and then performance instruments are telling us how is the aircraft performing based on our control inputs. So as the control performance method. We also have navigation instruments. Obviously, we use these a lot. They're kind of they become a part of our scan. They become part of our performance is essentially to help us then navigate. So it's kind of like the third layer. You control the aircraft, which changes performance, and then performance allows us to navigate. So it's kind of the third layer in our instrument cake. So we have a couple different navigation instruments in our aircraft. First, we have a VOR receiver. So you guys should be familiar somewhat with the VOR receiver. We tune into a VOR. We can set a course on a specific VOR radial, and it allows us to fly that course. The VOR is pretty important. When we fly IMC, we are flying along, so between airports, you are flying along a Victor airway. Most of the time, those Victor airways are established from VOR to VOR, so we use VORs all the time. The ADF stands for Automatic Direction Finder. This is the receiver in the aircraft. So this is the receiver in the aircraft. I believe it's this guy over here. That we use to navigate to an NDB, a non-directional beacon. NDBs are very similar to VORs, but these are pretty old and outdated. We don't really use them anymore. They're still around, but not a lot of people use them. So an AFD receiver receives an NDB signal, but these are kind of old, so we don't really use them. And GPS, satellite. So we can receive satellite information, GPS information. So that's our G1000 down here. G1000. And then we have the localizer and glide slope. Localizer and glide slope. These are probably new terms. You've probably never heard of these before. The localizer and glide slope, this is what we use for ILS, Instrument Landing System. So this is what helps us land on a runway. A localizer works very similarly to a VOR, except it kind of only works in one direction, or a limited, one direction. It works on, it's like tuning into one specific radial, and that radial is a runway. So it helps horizontally track you into a runway. And then the glide slope vertically gets you set up to land on that runway. So those two are typically associated with an ILS, or an instrument landing system. So these are our navigation instruments. Some aircraft will have a flight director. So if you have autopilot built into your airplane, um, your aircraft will have a flight director, or sometimes will have a flight director. The flight director is an electronic version of the control performance method. It Whether it's flying the airplane by itself or it's telling you how to fly, you can kind of see we have our G1000. This is a screenshot from the G1000. Right now we're flying straight and level. You can see that from how our those two lines in our triangle, this golden triangle, is angled right here. We're flying straight and level. But the flight director is telling us if we want to, I guess we're doing a turn, it looks like maybe just a straight and level turn or a climbing turn. It wants us to pitch up and bank to the left a little bit. So the idea is that you would get your golden triangle here to kind of fit inside the flight director. So the flight director is kind of telling you what to do. Or if it was just on autopilot, it would be saying this is what essentially kind of telling us this is what the autopilot is going to be doing. This is what you're about to do in your aircraft. So flight director can be very useful. It can kind of take a little bit of the load off when we're flying our aircraft. Kind of does some of the heavy lifting for us in terms of the control performance method. This is an activity we would have done had we been in class together, but we're not. So the primary and supporting instruments. So we're going to look at some different maneuvers, straight and level, turns, and climbs and descents. And we'll be talking about these in terms of the instruments, your control methods, what should you be relying on as your primary instrument given the phase of the maneuver you're in, whether you are established, meaning not changing. So if I'm established in that maneuver and not changing, what should be my primary instrument? Or if I'm establishing or changing, then what should be my primary flight instrument that I'm referencing? So for example, if we are in straight, if the goal is straight and level flight, if we're established, so in this far left column here, we have, if we are established, our primary pitch, if we're level, our primary instrument is going to be the altimeter, right? If I'm flying straight and level is always going to be different with our attitude indicator because we know, right, if we think back to aerodynamics, might have to think really hard about all the way back to aerodynamics. But if I want to maintain altitude at a given airspeed, we know that our pitch is always going to be different. Our pitch attitude is always going to be different depending on airspeed. So if I'm flying slow, I might have a higher pitch attitude. If I'm flying fast, I'm going to have a lower pitch attitude. So that's why if I'm established straight and level, I can't rely on my attitude indicator as my primary instrument because depending on the conditions, it's always going to be different. So that's why I want to rely on my altimeter because my altimeter is going to tell me if I'm flying straight and level, I should be maintaining an altitude. I should not be climbing. I should not be descending. So that's why for level flight, my altimeter is my primary flight instrument. For my bank, right, same thing with bank. My attitude indicator isn't going to be. I could use it. It should be level, but to keep us going straight, my primary instrument is going to be my heading. Okay, so if we're established, I'm looking at my altimeter, I'm looking at my heading, and my primary power. Okay, to keep my the power that I want, I should be looking at airspeed. So if I'm established, straight and level, I'm looking at my altimeter, I'm looking at my heading, and I'm looking at my airspeed to make any adjustments. Now what happens if I'm establishing straight and level. From changing pitch. So if I'm establishing straight and level from changing pitch, what are my primary instruments? In this case, now my primary instrument is the attitude indicator. When I'm establishing straight and level, my altimeter is going to be might be changing. So that's why I always set, when I'm establishing straight and level, I set that pitch attitude using my attitude indicator, not my altimeter. When I'm establishing, so it's different. We're not established, we're establishing. If I'm establishing straight and level via changing pitch, then my primary instrument is my attitude indicator. My primary bank, again, is still heading indication. So I'm still looking at my heading indicator. And then primary power has now changed to tachometer and or manifold pressure gauge, depending on my aircraft. Because again, when you straight and level, when we're establishing, we set a power using our RPM. We can't set a power using speed because it could change. So we set our power, our primary is going to be looking at the RPMs in our Cessna 172. So again, if we're establishing straight and level via changing pitch, my primary instrument for pitch is my attitude indicator. My primary bank instrument is the heading indicator, and my primary power is the tachometer and manifold pressure gauge, if applicable. Okay, what if we're establishing with changing airspeed? So now, if I'm established, let's say I'm establishing straight and level, but I'm changing my airspeed, my primary pitch is going to be the altimeter. So now we're referencing the altimeter because I don't want to be climbing. If I'm changing my airspeed, I don't want to be climbing. So I'm going to be looking for that altimeter to see if there's any change. Primary bank, again, still the heading indicator. And then primary power, again, tachometer and manifold pressure gauge, if applicable. Okay, so those are the primary instruments for your straight and level flight. Now let's transition to the turn, if we're in a turn. So if we're established in a turn, so my aircraft is established in a turn, I'm trimmed, I've been cross-checking, and now I'm cross-checking to see, do I need to make any adjustments? Again, I'm looking at my altimeter. If I'm in a straight and level turn, if I'm in a level turn, I'm referencing my altimeter. I want to make sure that I'm not climbing and not descending. My primary for bank, now we're looking at my turn coordinator, and I want to make sure that I'm achieving a standard rate turn. And then my primary for power is I'm referencing my airspeed. So if I need to make power adjustments, I would be referencing my airspeed. Now, if I'm establishing a turn, whether I'm starting or stopping that turn, my primary for pitch, still going to be my altimeter. My primary for bank changes to the attitude indicator. We're changing to the attitude indicator for that level turn. And then again, when establishing, the primary power is your tachometer or your manifold, or I should say, and your manifold pressure gauge, if applicable. So those are the primary instruments for established and establishing within a turn. And then for climbs and descents, okay, so I'm trying to climb or descend. If I'm established in a climb or descent, my primary pitch instruments now becomes my VSI. I'm going to be looking for a constant climb or descent rate. And I'm also going to be looking for a constant airspeed in my climb or descent. So once you are, again, this is established. Once I'm established in a climb or descent, I want to maintain an airspeed. The airspeed should not be changing. If it's changing, that means something is wrong with that climb or descent. If I'm descending and my airspeed keeps climbing, that means I'm pitching down too far. We want airspeed to be constant in a climb or descent. My primary bank if we're flying straight, is going to be, again, my heading indicator. So I want my heading indicator to be indicating the same heading in a straight climb or descent. And then my primary power, once established, is again, if I'm established, this is different from all the other ones, is my tachometer and manifold pressure gauge. If we are establishing, starting or stopping a climb or descent, my primary pitch, if we are establishing, so let's say I want to establish a VY pitch attitude, you would first set your pitch. So that is my primary instrument, my attitude indicator. Again, primary bank heading indicator for straight climbs or descents, and then primary power is your tachometer and manifold pressure gauge. Okay, so those are the primary instruments you would use in each of those phases of flight. Okay, let's real quick talk about common errors that people have with BAI. BAI, instrument cross-check and interpretation, common errors. The first of which is omission. So in a cross-check, student pilots, people who are new to instrument flying, will often omit, which means they leave out an important instrument. So that means like you check everything, but maybe you leave out your airspeed indicator. You forget to check it, or you leave out your heading indicator. You forget to check it. Maybe you fixate. Maybe you think there might be something wrong with one of your instruments, so you start to get over fixated. So maybe while you're flying, you get fixated on your VOR. You're trying to figure out how does the VOR work. You're trying to remember how do you intercept a course, and you start to get fixated on it, and you forget to look at the other flight instruments, and it could lead to some problems. And then the last one is emphasis. Very similar to fixation, but emphasis means you put too much attention on a certain instrument or a certain set of instruments. So maybe you put too much emphasis on your altitude. You're just micromanaging your altitude, or you're micromanaging your airspeed. That's putting too much emphasis on one of those control methods. So you want to make sure you avoid these common errors. You want to make sure you're checking everything. You don't want to get fixated on something for too long, and you want to avoid emphasizing one instrument or one set of instruments over the others. And then when it comes to aircraft control, some common errors, people forget their rules of thumb. So again, do I have it open? Let's see. No, I don't. Go to the ERAU Standards Manual, find the rules of thumb for instrument flight, and make sure that you know those rules of thumb. So there's this whole couple pages on rules of thumb. Make sure you know those, and make sure you keep them in mind when you are controlling your aircraft, because it's going to help take some of the pressure off and help you control your aircraft better. There are several of those. People also will tend to make abrupt control movements, or just over control the aircraft. Everything you do in instrument flying should be slow and smooth. There should be no abrupt movements when you're controlling your aircraft. So that's why we have a standard rate turn. We don't want to turn too fast. We don't want to make the aircraft jump around. Everything should be smooth and precise. Sometimes a lot of people won't use their trim, so they won't trim their aircraft. Remember, that is a part of instrument flying. is you establish, you trim, you cross-check, you adjust. So the trim is now a part of the process. It's not kind of an extra bonus thing. It's a part of instrument flying. So make sure you're always using trim. And then last, a lot of people will make uncoordinated turns. And that will throw off some of your flight instruments. So always try to be establishing coordinated turns when instrument flying. Okay, that is the end of Unit 6. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, whether that's through email, whether that's through the Microsoft Teams or through Canvas. So if you have questions, please reach out, and I can help fill you in on anything that you're struggling with. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.